Hello everyone, this is Josh Vision, and I'm here to give you my The White Queen Season 1, Episode 1 review. So, this episode, when it comes down to it, is all about Elizabeth Woodville and King Edward IV's marriage. So, we start this episode off with, it seems like Elizabeth is having like a dream or like some type of, or looking into, I don't know how you call it, but she sees her husband, who I believe is named Surgeon or something Grey, being literally chased down by King Edward IV on a horse. And her husband is literally gives up. He's injured significantly. I believe he got a cut on his forearm, a really deep bruise, bleeding profusely. And he just sits underneath the tree and he yells as he awaits the blade from Edward IV. So after this happens, we see Elizabeth wake up, and we see her start to get herself ready. She wakes her boys Thomas and Richard up, and she speaks with her mother, saying that she has to go see the king. And her mother is kind of against this, but Elizabeth's like, you know what, I have no choice. So the episode says that basically she's over in Hampshire, London. So her and her boys are traveling, and her boys are asking, okay, where are we going? And she says, we're about to meet the king. So I believe one of the boys, I believe it was Richard, said, oh, so we're going to meet King Henry. And she's like, no, we're going to see King Edward. And the older boy, I believe his name's Thomas, he's like, Edward? He said, basically, screw Edward. He killed our father, and he's a usurper. And she's like, quiet, he's a king for now, so keep your opinions to yourself. So during the break, during the travels, her and the boys, they see Edward and Richard Neville and their army coming towards them. So they stop, and Edward, is just enchanted by Elizabeth. And likewise, Elizabeth with Edward. Richard Neville notices this, and he's trying his hardest to downplay it. So Elizabeth tells the king, listen, I've been living with my parents, me and my children, and my husband died. And since he died, basically y'all have taken like his land, and I can't like help. I no longer have any control of my son's inheritance, and without the inheritance, we have nothing. And I believe Richard Neville asks her, okay, so who's your husband? And she says Surgeon Grey. And he was like, Surgeon Grey, like with a scoff. He was like, that dude was the head of the Lancastrian cavalry. He was the one that killed. He was responsible, leading like. Basically be responsible for killing 700 of their men, and almost ran Edward through. And she was like, listen, he did his duty as a loyal servant to the king at the time, and regardless, my sons need their father's inheritance. So Edward's like, all right, and he tells Richard Neville and the rest of his army to go on ahead of him, while he basically goes to Elizabeth and the boys' family's home. So when they get there, Richard Neville sort of sneaks on behind them, and he notices Elizabeth's mother, who I forgot her name, but all I know is that she was a Lancastrian, and he kind of mocks her for basically marrying Baron Rivers, who was a commoner, despite her royal like prestige and superiority. And she said, listen, he was a squire, and he's twice the man you are. And he kind of laughs at that. So after that, we have the very interesting scenes of this episode when it comes to Edward's and Elizabeth's attraction towards each other. We have Edward and Elizabeth talking about the war, and Edward says that King Henry VI now has his wits back, and now him and Margaret, Queen Margaret, which is Henry VI's wife, they got like some men from France, to help them along with their own army to try to fight Edward on the battlefield, which I believe he said was happening like within the next day or so, a couple of days from now. So she tells Edward that she hopes that that there's no more wars after this, and that she hopes that he's victorious. And Edward and her are really embracing, really getting intimate. And while they get intimate, her brothers and father comes into play. So they're saying that Edward's a Yorkist, you can't trust him, he's a usurper, and that Yorkists don't have any justice, and that he was responsible for killing over half of England's population in the Battle of Townshend, which I believe historically is actually the most bloody battle of all English history. I think like 60,000 people died or something along them lines, or 32,000. So Edward's like, first off, let's be real here. I'm fair, and King Henry was mad, and he smiled on his face before and had them beheaded and murdered. Matter of fact, one of my family members, my own father, my brother, was beheaded and murdered because of King Henry and his wife, Queen Margaret. So don't tell me about justice and what makes a good king. So before he leaves, he tells Elizabeth, or kind of reminds her, so do you have the things you want in regards to like your son's inheritance from their father? And I believe he told her like a day or so ago about writing it down on a piece of paper. So she did. She gave it to him, and then he says he walked me to the garden. So they walk to the garden. He really wants to make love to Elizabeth, and she's like, I can't. And he says, listen, I might die tomorrow. You mean I really feel something for you. And he says, listen, we don't have to do it here. Meet me in the morning by the tree where we first met, and then we'll go about it. Even if we don't do it, at least I can say my final goodbyes. So when he leaves and she goes back to the house, her brothers and her father are pissed. They're like, listen, this dude's no good. He's basically a male whore. He screwed at least half of the people at court, and he's a Yorkist. Like, and he wants you only for your body. You think he's gonna give you your husband's land's inheritance to your children without, through charity? No, he wants something from you. He wants to screw you. And she's like, listen, that's not gonna happen. And they're kind of like, okay, sure, and they walk off. After that, we have Elizabeth speaking with her mother, and her mother kind of wakes her up early in the morning, and they go to the river or some type of like water or whatever, and she has these strings which are like threads, and basically Elizabeth's like, listen, this is magic, we can't be doing this, we'll get executed. And I believe her mother said, listen, we're descended from the goddess Melisandre or something like that. And she kind of commanded her to take a thread, and Elizabeth's like, okay, what's the point of taking this thread? And she was like, basically the thread that you keep basically foretells your future, and you got to wheel it in like 3/4 a day or something in terms of inches, something along the lines. So after that, we had Edward IV meet up with Elizabeth, and they're about to have sex, but Elizabeth's not having it. At one point, she takes out a knife, and Edward's really frustrated by this, saying, you want to humiliate me, you want to basically not show any affection towards me despite our genuine connection, so this will be the last time you'll see me. So after that, I believe Edward calls, well, before that, Elizabeth's really hurt by this because she does have genuine feelings for Edward. I believe Edward calls for her father and her brothers to come fight with him against Henry VI, and to bring some of their peasants or servants with them, as well. So while this is happening, when they all meet up, Richard Neville and Baron Rivers are going at it, Elizabeth Woodville's father. And during this commotion, while Edward IV and Elizabeth, they're talking, they kind of forgive each other for what happened, and Edward gives a suggestion that, we should marry, if you won't have me, let's marry so we can make this official. So they get married, and Elizabeth brings her mother, and I believe for the next couple of weeks or days, they're actually making love and living in this hunter's lodge, somewhere deep in the forest, which no one would catch them. So after this, eventually Elizabeth's brother Anthony finds out about it, and at first he calls her a whore, but Elizabeth mentions the fact that that they're married. And by the way, since I'm on it, it slipped my mind, but one of the threads I talked about earlier about her and her mother and about the whole threading thing about the future, when she was rolling in the thread, at the end of it was a crown. And that was very ironic, and it connects to the whole marriage thing, because when Edward forgot his ring during the marriage ceremony, she said, I have a ring, and he used that ring, you know, kind of like as official, like we're married kind of ring. So anyways, so Anthony's like, okay, this is a sham, you know, I've heard Edward married before, and he has a son with someone, but he never made it official, you know, and he talks about how Edward's a puppet. The only reason why he became the king is because of Richard Neville, how much of a bad person Richard Neville is, and how Richard Neville is a kingmaker, and how Edward's just a puppet, and Elizabeth's not having it. But after that, she's starting to get paranoid, because Edward said earlier that after he goes to war, after he's done dealing with the Lancastrians like Henry VI and Queen Margaret, that they have to keep their marriage secret, because if they keep the marriage secret, it'll make it easier for him to reveal it as time goes on, and basically saying that's not the right time to do it. You know, especially if they tell anyone in the village, because if they tell the village, that'll go to the town, the cities, then eventually to Neville and all that crap. And as of right now, Richard Neville's been working a deal with the French for the past year to get Edward married to Princess Bonnet, to basically end hostilities with the French and all that crap. So eventually, Elizabeth gets the news that Edward was victorious against Henry VI's army, and that Henry VI is somewhere, and that Queen Margaret and their child is somewhere in Scotland, you know, hiding. But Anthony, Elizabeth's brother, which I mentioned before, he's like, yo, she ain't gonna stop until her boy's on the throne. And Elizabeth's mother, well, both their mothers, you know, said, listen, it don't matter. Right now, Edward's in charge, and while he's in charge, we basically give him our total allegiance. So eventually, I believe Edward calls Elizabeth's father and brothers to court, and I believe the Princess Bonnie or Bonnet's there, whatever, right? So Richard Neville thinks there's going to be an announcement. Everyone thinks knows going to be an announcement of marriage, one way or the other. And Richard thinks that, okay, I got this. I arranged this. Now Edward's going to marry Princess Bonnet. Everything's good. But basically, Edward sort of brings Richard Neville to the side and tells him basically that he's already married. And Richard Neville's pissed off about this, and he should be rightfully so pissed off about this, especially during the timing, basically the period, the whole rich class, lower class, common class, and the fact he has been working this deal for a year, and then all of a sudden you're gonna tell me you're married, especially to a common girl. Matter of fact, I think he called her a strumpet, a whore, roadside kill. He was vicious with the insults, and that was like, yo, do not talk to my wife and your queen like that. He was like, no. And Richard Neville was basically trying to be kind of like a bully in a sense. He's like, listen, you're gonna basically not even take that marriage seriously, and you're gonna go back there and tell them that you're officially gonna marry Princess Bonnie. And Edward does the opposite. He says, I'm officially married to Elizabeth Grey. So once that's announced, Richard Neville's highly pissed about it, obviously. So Elizabeth Grey and her family go into court, where everyone's watching them. So I believe you have one woman named Lady Margaret who speaks to Elizabeth's mother, and I believe Lady Margaret was a supporter of the Lancastrian regime, and she was pissed at the fact that Elizabeth's mother was now openly supporting Edward. She considered him a usurper and nothing more, not the true heir. And once again, Elizabeth's mother's letting people know, it don't matter what y'all feel. Right now, Edward's in charge. While he's in charge, I'd rather keep my head. I don't want any treason. So I'm just going to take it as it is. And plus, my daughter's married to him anyway, so why would I want any beef with him? So while they're coming up the stairs, Edward and Elizabeth and the rest of Elizabeth's family, her father, brother, mother, cousins, and all that stuff, Richard Neville's wife is saying that basically Edward's making a sham of the whole Yorkist cause and the people that's died for the cause by marrying this common woman, this commoner. Like, this is not how things go. And Richard Neville's like, listen, Edward's basically a lover. He's full of lust, and I'm eventually going to get him back in line. And then his wife's like, basically, I hope you do. So after that, the scenes kind of end with Elizabeth Grey and her mother meeting Duchess Cecily, I believe, which is Edward IV's mother. And she's not down with this at all. She was saying she doesn't agree to this. And she doesn't agree with the fact that Elizabeth's a commoner. Also that she's been married and she's a widow. And that she already has 2 kids. And she's older than her son. And that she feels that she should probably denounce Edward as the king and put her other son, George, on the throne by saying that Edward's a bastard. So Elizabeth's mom was like, okay, so if you're going to do that, I heard stories about how you cuckolded Edward's father, Richard, basically while you were married, and that you screwed an archer, whoever his name was. So you're basically admitting that you are a commoner-loving whore. And she was about to go in even more, and then basically Edward's mother got the point, and she was like, nothing. So she sat her tail back down, you know what I mean? And Elizabeth Grey was like, well, you know the protocol when it comes to queens. Curtsy. Bow down. And she did it. Pissed off as she was, she did it. And then after that, we had yet another love scene with Edward and Elizabeth. And then we end the episode with Elizabeth and her mom looking into a mirror, and Elizabeth sees basically herself covered, see a woman covered in blood, and her mother asks, whose blood? And Elizabeth says, that is my blood. So that's all I got for this review, you guys. Sorry that it was very long. Like, so much things happened in this episode. If I missed anything, write some comments down below. It's Josh Vision. Adios.